today what I want to do is to share with you a message that I think will help you in your toolbox of resources. Healing the Culture exists to give you the resources that you need to do your work and to do it well. We're like a support system for you, but we also are an energizer. And we've sort of focused on something that's not being done by the pro-life movement that we think is critical and essential. Healing the Culture exists to dispel a lot of the myths that people have about what it means to be a human person. My whole argument to you today is in whatever field you work, whether you work from birth or with unborn children, or whether you work to the tomb with people who are dying, or with the elderly, or whether you work somewhere in between, there is a message that we have as Catholics, as Christians, about the dignity of the human person that our culture needs to hear. And I'll tell you what's happening. All of our education about the statistics involved in our ministries, about the practical issues involved in our ministries, about the help that's available, all of the information about things like fetal development and hospice care and services for people with disabilities are critical, and they are essential. And we win hearts and we save lives, and we also gain souls for Christ by doing this work. But we also need to do the work of changing ideas. Our culture infuses in people very bad, shallow, narrow, and dangerous definitions of success, quality of life, happiness, freedom, personhood, human rights. All of these terms are critical for human beings to understand fully in order to understand these issues fully. One little mistake in an idea can cause huge cultural consequences. One little mistake in the human heart can cause huge personal trouble and difficulties. So it not only serves human beings well to explain and redefine these terms, it also serves the culture well and serves our ministries well. This is Father Robert Spitzer. Father Spitzer is the founder of our program. He's the author of 2 books, Healing the Culture and 10 Universal Principles, which are available as in a free package if you want to choose this option. We'll talk about that at the end of the day. We're going to equip you with all kinds of materials to use in your ministries to help teach these ideas and to help teach these truths to the people you reach. But he wrote these books and then helped me found this organization. And his whole purpose in this organization is this: that there are critical principles that exist to help civilizations thrive. And when even one of those principles is lost in a culture, if a culture abandons even one of these principles, that civilization will eventually begin to destroy itself. And so the work that we do is not just to save a life, although it is that indeed. It is also to save civilization. You can see around us, civilization is crumbling, a real civilization. I don't mean a civilization of technology, or a civilization of healthcare. I mean a civilization of people who work together for the true common good. You can see it being destroyed in our definition of love, our definition of sex, our definition of marriage, our definition of the dignity of the human person, our definition of what it means to grow old, of what it means to be young, of what it means to be valuable and worthy. You can see civilization crumbling. And so his whole argument is to say, we as Catholics, as Christians, are the keepers of the critical principles that are essential not only for human happiness, but also for civilization. Most of the principles I'm going to share with you today originated either in the early ancient Greeks or from the Catholic Church. And these are principles that are used, or have been used up till now, in the secular culture to keep civilization flourishing. And it's up to us now. It's up to you and me to carry these principles back into our culture. But it's not just enough to give people head knowledge of these principles. We also have to move them in their hearts. Because if people are not moved in their hearts to want to live for these principles, they won't care. They will abandon these principles because principles get in the way of my good. When it comes to the common good versus my own good, they will choose my own good. This was very apparent in the debate that I did at Berkeley a couple weeks ago. During the question and answer period, all the questions were very focused on me, the questioner. My rights, my freedom, my good, my needs, my wants, my future, with very little look to the outer world of what makes my world worth it, of what makes my life worth living. And so we need to inspire people for a greater purpose beyond themselves. And we can do that not just through theology, but sometimes we need to precede our theology with philosophy. Ideas have consequences. People need to have wisdom, understand their world, before they can sometimes even approach God. And so my argument today is going to be for us not to be afraid of combining faith with reason. God gave us brains for a reason, so that we could share the truth we know with others and give them a reason for that faith. Right? St. Paul verified this in scriptures when he says, be ready to have a reason for the faith that is in you. That's what we're going to do today. Just a couple days ago, I received an email from Gary Landau, who's the director of youth ministry in the Diocese of Belleville. And I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this with you. It was so profound and so critical. He says, students need philosophy first, before an understanding of Catholic morality. Philosophy is what drives our thoughts that lead to our actions. Our philosophy influences how we interpret the world, so it's fundamental. He says the fact is that everyone has a philosophy of life. The problem is that it is often ill-formed and uninformed. So it's incumbent upon us to help form people's consciences by forming their philosophy of the world so that they're living for what is truly worthy of them. Now let me give you an actual concrete example of what happens when people have false ideas or false interpretations about the meaning of life, the worth of their life, the meaning of the word happiness. This is Viktor Frankl. This picture is when Viktor Frankl was young and had been liberated from a Nazi concentration camp. He's standing out in front of the camp he was imprisoned in. And then that's a picture of him many years later after he'd written his book, Man's Search for Meaning. In his book, it's a little book, I highly encourage you to get it and read it. The first half of it is about his experience in the concentration camps. The second half of it is about the program he developed for psychotherapy called logotherapy, which it means meaning therapy. He argued that a lot of times people who are having psychological problems, it's not drugs that they need, it's a reinterpretation of the meaning and purpose of life. And so he developed this whole philosophy to help people come to a better, deeper understanding of what life is about so that they could reinterpret the terms they were misinterpreting. And in the first part of his book, he gives an example by the story of his life in the concentration camps of why this is so important. He talks about how when you're in a concentration camp, you were stripped of everything. Right? Your clothes, your hair, all of your belongings, your family, your career, your rank, your dignity, everything. And he says in order to continue a sense of purpose, he observed, which is what he did as a psychologist for so many years. He observed people, and he found that the camp kind of divided itself into two different groups of prisoners in that camp. He said the first group, the first half, were people who tended to ground their sense of identity, of meaning and purpose in something that was tangible, finite, concrete, such as the next meal they were going to eat, making sure they had the best place to sleep so they'd get a decent night's rest, being deloused, right? Avoiding the blows from the guards, or something maybe a little bit broader, but still something concrete and finite, such as the Allies will liberate us by Christmas time. And they would choose this date, and they would say, that's when we'll get liberated. I'm going to hold on till that date. And what happened? When the Allies did not liberate them by Christmas time, they died, literally. These are the people that he observed were the most prone to death, to succumbing to their injuries and their illnesses. Why? Because they had lost a sense of purpose. The other people, he said, the ones who tended to survive, to be liberated from the camps eventually, were those who grounded their identity in something transcendental, something that was non-physical, non-material, love, hope, their faith, forgiveness for those who were persecuting them, compassion for other people around them who were suffering, kindness towards others, a sense that their life still had meaning. Those people survived. This is our message. Our message is that meaning is everything. If the pro-choice, pro-abortion, pro-euthanasia, pro-assisted suicide movement, if the movements who do not see the dignity in the people who are disabled, in people who are poor, in people who are homeless, in people who are disenfranchised, if the culture does not see value in these people, if it misinterprets the value of those human beings, we will radically lose our civilization. But if we could change that definition of meaning and purpose, We can heal our culture. Meaning is everything. So I'm going to share with you a concept that Father Spitzer created to help us elevate how people are defining meaning and purpose in life. And you'll be able to see the application of this. I won't have time to apply it to every field that's represented here. You'll be able to see that. And there are a lot of materials and books in the back that you can get that will help apply it to your particular field. But Father Spitzer has created a program called the 4 Levels of Happiness, which I'm going to share with you. That's what we're going to focus on in the first part of today's discussion. And you've probably seen other structures, other systems of hierarchies of happiness, such as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for example, or Erik Erikson's fulcrum of identity, or other programs that talk about, how we define our meaning and our purpose in life. A lot of studies are done on human happiness. Father Spitzer calls them 4 levels of happiness because it's easy, it's colloquial, it hits modern man pretty well, and it's really easy to teach to young people. Anything you could define as a meaning in life, a purpose in life, happiness, fulfillment, can be fit into one of these 4 categories. And so it becomes very helpful because it helps us to remember, it helps us to identify where we think somebody is acting from, and it helps us to teach, to share a deeper notion with people. The first level of happiness is called physical pleasure and possessions. It's the kind of happiness that comes from material good. It's the lowest level of happiness because it's the easiest to obtain. Happiness level 1 can be achieved through a physical pleasure, such as eating something good or smelling something wonderful, like coffee in the morning, right? Through feeling something like a nice back rub or the warm sun outside when you are, having some leisure time. It can be experienced through looking at something beautiful, like you go and look at a beautiful painting at the museum, or you go to the mountains and you observe the beauty of nature. So in one of the ways that our 5 senses can be turned on, that would lead to a level 1 kind of a happiness. Eating, drinking, the act of procreation, right? It's physically pleasing. Possessions, owning things, having stuff. It's the lowest level because it's the easiest to get. It doesn't require very much of us. It doesn't use very many of our talents or our skills or our abilities. It's also the lowest level because it's immediately gratifying and then it's gone. It doesn't last very long. Right? You see the pastry outside, you eat it, it's delicious, you feel good, you sit down, now you feel a little bloated. Right? In another couple of hours you're going to want something else to eat. Right? So it's immediately gratifying and then it's gone. It's also the lowest level because it doesn't affect very many people beyond yourself. So it's not very pervasive. Right? So it's not very deep, it's not very lasting, and it's not very pervasive. So that's why we would consider it the lowest level of happiness. But happiness level 1 is good. There's nothing wrong with level 1 in and of itself. God gave you a body, you need to sustain it, so he makes the things that you need to live pleasurable, enticing, so that you want them. Right? And he makes an overabundance of these things uncomfortable, so that we will learn to live within the mean, so that we will learn to live within just what's just right for us. So level 1 is a good. Our bodies are good. The things that we need to sustain them are good. Enjoying those things are good. The bad comes in when human beings make a little mistake. One little idea can have major consequences, not only to us, but to those outside of ourselves as well. If someone were to put the word only in front of level 1, the only thing that makes life worth living is physical pleasure and possessions, they get into trouble. Or even the term most important, the most important thing in life is physical pleasure and possessions. Now think for a moment, either in your own life when you have done this, something you wanted that was more important than anything else, and you sought to achieve it despite consequences that were happening, and you kind of overlooked them or didn't see them, and later on you realize that people got hurt because of your drive for that one thing. If you can't see it in yourself, think about people around you that you know that you have seen self-destruct in level 1. Or think about even somebody in a movie, or somebody in a book, or somebody in history. The crisis of happiness level 1 is boredom with things. Human beings end up restless because things aren't just that as fulfilling as we thought they would be. They're not meeting our expectations. It causes low self-esteem when all we live for is physical pleasure and possessions. Why does it cause low self-esteem? Because human beings have a natural tendency to define our own dignity and worth with the things that we're filling ourselves up with. And so we will begin to think that our value has no more value than all the stuff we've accumulated. And yet we long to have more value than that stuff. And so we begin to feel like we are living beneath ourselves. Happiness level 1 is not a very good pleasure to pursue for the long term, especially as we grow up, because it will leave us in despair. It will lead us to crisis. So we need happiness level 2. Happiness level 2 is a little higher than level 1. It's called the ego gratification. It's the kind of happiness that comes from turning on my ego, the recognition of myself, and noticing that I can achieve things for myself and feel good about it. There are 4 different ways you can achieve an ego gratification. You can get an ego high, right? Feeling good about yourself from success or achievement. You want to graduate from some kind of a university program. You work really hard. You study late at night. You have some failures, you have some successes, and you manage to graduate. And there's that sense of accomplishment that you did it, right? And that's a good kind of happiness. Now, level 2 uses more of my powers and abilities than level 1. That's why we consider it a little higher. It uses some intellectual abilities, or maybe some athletic abilities, or some other kind of skill that I have to spend time developing. It's a little bit higher because the happiness we get from level 2 is longer lasting. You can feel good for many years after achieving a college diploma, or maybe a career change, or maybe achieving some other good, or some contest or competition that you're engaged in. It leaves you happier longer, and it's a deeper kind of happiness, and it affects more people beyond yourself. A second way you can achieve happiness level 2 is from being better than others, the comparative advantage, right? There I am at work with my buddies, and we're all gathered around to try to solve a problem. And somebody has a kind of an okay idea, and somebody else has a decent idea, but I've got a better idea, right? And I let everybody know my idea, and their jaws drop to the ground, and they're like, why didn't we think of that? And I'm like, because you're not me. That's happiness level 2. The happiness that comes from being better than others, from comparing myself to others and recognizing that I come out ahead. A third way you can achieve happiness level 2 is by popularity or admiration, being liked, right? You laugh at all my jokes, I feel good, I go home, my husband says, how'd you do? I said, great, honey, right? Makes me feel good. But it's not enough. I want something more out of this than that. A fourth way you can get happiness level 2 is power or control. Right, having authority over other people. And that could be a very important part of life as well. If you're the commander of a military unit, you're trying to get all your men and women focused towards a particular goal, you have to have authority, command, right, over these people. You have to have some kind of control over your soldiers. Otherwise, nobody knows what to do, people are shooting each other, they don't have any strategy, and you lose the war, everybody dies. So control and power can be very important. Admiration can be important, popularity can be important. If you write a book and it has a good concept in it that will help save people's lives, you need people to read your book. So you need to get popular. You got to get on some TV show, have a bunch of quotes on the back of the book from famous people who say how great you are, and then people will read your book. So level 2 is not a bad thing in and of itself. When do you think it becomes bad for us? Yes, when we live for happiness level 2 as an end in itself instead of a means to a greater end. When we do that, we end up in deep crisis. When we live for happiness level 2 as if it were the only thing that makes life worth living. When we live for the sake of achievement. I want power for the sake of power. I want to be popular for the sake of popularity because being popular makes me feel so good and gives me meaning and worth and helps me set myself apart from everyone else. And if I don't have power and popularity and I begin to lose that, I lose my identity. I lose who I am. I lose my very self. Please recognize me. Please notice me. Please see what I'm doing. How many of our young people in college universities today are being taught this? What makes you valuable and worthy is how you perform, how you act, how you get ahead, how independent you are. We did man-on-street interviews with young people. You can see them in our video. It's amazing, the answers they give for what makes you happy, what gives you deep purpose, what do you think success is. They gave you everything from being healthy, being independent, cars, parties. Those are the kinds of things that make me happy. Getting a college degree, hanging around with my friends, knowing that they like me. This is what we got on a college campus. This was an average college campus, a secular average college campus with a mix of people from all different religion denominations or no religious denominations at all. These are the waters our young people are swimming in. We are becoming very quickly a very level 1, level 2 culture. It's in media, It's in the news all the time, level 1 and level 2. You can see these messages, how much more important level 1 and level 2 really are than anything else. It's in advertisements, in marketing. You can see it in the fashion industry. You can see it in the political professions all over the place, right? You can see it in, practically every segment of culture. Music, arts and entertainment. You can see it in literature. Level 1 and 2 are being stressed far beyond what they should be. And so what do? Here's the crisis that comes from happiness level 2. People who put the only in front of level 2 will soon find themselves experiencing one or all of these aspects of crisis. One of them is anger. You might notice this in your own life, or if you don't like to look at your own life in that way, you could probably see it in somebody else's life. You could see that people who focus on level 2 as the most important thing, the competition, or this achievement I need to succeed at, right? Or being popular, or power, they become very angry people. Not pleasant people to be around. And this is important to teach to others, because people need to identify with the crisis before they feel compelled to move to a higher level. And I guarantee you, almost everyone will identify with these crises. I've been speaking on these 4 levels of happiness for almost 25 years now. I've spoken to tens of thousands of people in all kinds of audiences, secular, religious, young, old, black, white, doesn't matter. 99% of my audiences identify with these crises and acknowledge that level 3 and level 4 are better for us. That little 1% that doesn't, you're always going to get somebody hard in the audience that you just can't change their mind. And then you just got to say, well, don't say, I'll pray for you. We always want to say, I'll pray for you. Don't say that. Tell them this. If level 1 or level 2 is working for you, do pray for them, by the way. But you say, if level 1 or level 2 is working for you, okay, that's, you may be the one person that has disproven my theory. But if you ever find that it really isn't cutting it, if you ever discover this level really isn't good enough for me, I would just encourage you to remember level 3 and 4. Just keep that in your little toolbox and give it a try and see if it doesn't make you happier. And I'll be there for you if you need me. Or there'll be others if you can't find me. Just keep it in your toolbox, because I think you're worth that. You're just worth the whole menu. Level 2 is doing it for you. That's okay. I'm not going to force you into level 3 or 4, my interpretation of what I think meaning in life is. You're a free human being. But I think you deserve the whole menu, so I'm giving it to you. Keep it in your toolkit. That's what we tell them. Another thing people experience who are stuck in happiness level 2 is jealousy. Have you ever been? How many people have ever been there? Jealousy of someone else who had more than you could. Some of you are not raising your hand. You're right. I know you. Right? We feel jealous when somebody else has something that we can't have, or could do something, or they put us down, they hurt our ego. Right? It makes us feel jealousy, or even a sense of rage at someone else who has more than we do. Or what about the opposite? If I'm a winner and I have more than you have, we can hold other people in contempt. Yeah, you're just kind of this poor sniveling idiot. Don't have as much as I don't know as much as I do, but that's okay. You enjoy your poor, pathetic life. I know you like it, or think you do. As long as you're groveling at my feet, that's okay. Just keep giving me what's due me, and we can just tolerate each other and agree to disagree on who's most important here. Yeah, that kind of contempt for other people who are less than we are leads to an aggressive kind of a personality who will bowl over other people despite the cost to his family, his own friendships, his own beloveds, right? And even himself or herself. And then, of course, there's the anxiety that is intrinsic to the level 2 competition, where you're always worried, your stomach is always hurting about how I'm going to do. Your heart is always racing. Is somebody going to steal my thunder? Is somebody going to have more power than I am? Is somebody going to take over my control? Is somebody going to beat me? Is somebody going to become more popular than I am? Are people going to forget about me? That anxiety becomes unbearable. I've been there. I admit it, I've been there. It happens to all of us. Are they going to like my speech? Right? Or are they going to hate me? Am I going to get booed? Right? Those feelings are just part of the human experience. And suspicion of other people. Have you ever done that? Where you were so focused on your own ego that you become suspicious even of your own kids, right? Yeah, sure, you love me. Whatever, where they're like, but mommy, I do. Or your husband or your wife, or you're really suspicious. What do you want anyway? You don't care about me. And she's just sitting there going, but I was just asking you what you like for dinner. Have you ever done that or had that experience? And then the resentment. Resentment comes because everybody else is so happy, and they shouldn't be, because they don't have what I have, so why am I not happy? And we resent others, and then we resent ourselves. And if we have faith, we may even resent God. Because you're playing a joke on me. You don't care. This was your plan and purpose all along. And you're probably laughing at me. You know, it's interesting. The way people tend to define meaning and purpose in life for themselves tends to be how they define God. Right? God is this level 2 jerk who is probably just playing games with my life for his own ego enjoyment. Right? And you can get these myths about God. We'll talk about some of those myths about God later. Here's the third level of happiness, good beyond the self. Now, the third level of happiness is higher than the other 2 levels because it's longer lasting. When you do a good for someone or something beyond yourself, you can get happiness from that or a sense of meaning and worth your entire life. Just from one good you did. I had 2 daughters. That gives my life meaning and purpose. I sacrificed myself so that I could bring new life into the world despite the risks to myself. And every doctor and healthcare worker told me the risks. Oh my God, you're in your 40s. Do you know you could die? Do you know this could happen to you? Do you know this could happen to your baby? Do you know the risks? Yeah, that's what makes it worth it. Because I know the risks, and I'm willing to sacrifice for the good of another human being who is here, by the way. Not who may come into existence, but she's here. And I'm willing to take that risk because it makes life worth living. That's level 3. Level 3 is the kind of happiness that comes from being willing to sacrifice yourself for a good beyond yourself. And there are lots of ways we can do that. Plato called these Aristotle called these the 5 transcendentals. Here's just some images you can see of people, real people doing real goods beyond themselves. These are not staged. But you could just see the happiness of the people who are engaged in this goodness. Somebody caring for an elderly person, somebody caring or working with, it looks like the guy is having more fun coloring than the kid is, right? You know, it's like, oh, that's my brother, by the way. Okay. The older one's my brother, youngest, my nephew, is all grown up by now. And then this man just looking with love at this little boy during a time of war, helping this refugee get relief. Right? You can see that joy and that goodness. There are 5 different ways you can achieve a happiness level 3 through the 5 transcendentals. Truth, love, goodness, beauty, and home. And those 5 transcendentals are important. You may be seeking truth so that you can add to the body of truth and knowledge in the world to help people so that the world could be a better place. Building a better car, figuring out something in health or in biology that will help people live longer lives or cure diseases. Helping learn some concepts of economics that will lead to wealthier nations that can support other nations and drive other poorer nations into prosperity, whatever it is. Right? Level 3, that drive for truth, for discovering more knowledge that will help people. Second one, justice. I'm not sure that that's on your sheet, so you might need to write these down. Truth, justice. The search for things to be fair or for things to be good and set right. Justice. For people to get what they are due, what they are owed. So maybe you're pursuing a career in politics or a career in law, or maybe as a teacher you have to help resolve disputes all the time, or maybe as a counselor, or as a mother and father you have to resolve disputes, right? Looking for justice in the world. Truth, love, justice, love, the desire to unconditionally accept another human being for who they are, to know them and accept them and want them, that's love. Love can be defined as the desire to do the good for the other, whereby doing the good for the other becomes just as easy, if not easier, than doing the good for yourself. Love. The desire to do a good for the other, whereby doing the good for the other becomes just as easy, if not easier, than doing the good for the self. And actually, not just the desire, because you can have the desire and not act on it, and that's not love. So I would say it's acting on the desire to do the good for the other. Remember the Good Samaritan, right? Those 2 dudes on the other side of the road, they didn't do anything wrong, right? They maybe even had a desire to help the poor guy, but they didn't want to get involved, so they kept walking. It was the Samaritan who stopped to help. That was love. Despite the risk to himself, that was love. Truth, love, justice, beauty. Human beings desire to see order, things making sense, right? The beauty of an equation properly solved. The beauty of music that is just uplifting, where none of the notes are flawed. The beauty of architecture before us, some great, vision in front of you of a cathedral, or the beauty of nature, hearing a bird singing out in nature with this beautiful sunset. Human beings desire that. And then the 5th one is, technically it's called the one, or it's also known as unity, but I like to call it home. The sense of being at one with all that is. The sense that of being at home. Authentically feeling that you are totally, perfectly at home with all that is. Now here's the problem with level 3. Level 3 is very good. We all desire it and we all seek it. And if we don't try to satisfy that desire, we will end up in crisis. But when we do try to satisfy the desire for level 3, we also end up in crisis. Because human beings are natural ultimatizers. We don't just want some truth, we want absolute truth. We want all the right answers to all the questions. We don't just want some justice, things kind of work out as fair as they can get. We want perfect justice. And when we see that somebody has suffered an injustice that can never be corrected, we feel a sense of righteous indignation. Somebody went to prison for 10 years for a crime that he never committed. He will never get those 10 years back. There's nothing we could do to make up for that loss for him. And so we feel this sense of crisis, that the world cannot resolve these desires for perfect justice, for unconditional love. We want to be unconditionally loved. And yet it's very difficult to really feel like you are receiving unconditional love from another human being. Very close. Human beings can get very close to unconditional love. But there's always something missing from the love that comes from another human being. Because another human being cannot know me perfectly. You cannot understand me perfectly in all of my thoughts and all of my desires because I don't even understand myself perfectly. And so I feel a little bit of alienation, or a little bit of just having to make do, or having to let go and let you be human and me be human, and yet that desire for ultimate, perfect, unconditional love doesn't go away. I just try to squash it, or ignore it, right? Or release myself from it, but it doesn't work. The desire for perfect beauty. But every beautiful architectural structure has a flaw somewhere. And eventually, over time, the stones start to fall out of place and it gets into disrepair. Right? Every beautiful piece of music, Mozart, Brahms, you listen to it over and over and over and over, and pretty soon it gets boring and you want to listen to something else. Right? Happiness level 3 is great, but it can lead us into crisis. Same thing for the desire for authentic home. Right? We've all been at home before, we've felt at home before, but there seems to be something missing from it. We desire more, and the problem with happiness level 3 is if we try to get our sense of happiness from level 3 by trying to fulfill those desires with the world, with other human beings, we end up disappointed. Other human beings cannot fulfill us perfectly. We end up frustrated at other people who cannot fulfill these things perfectly. Frustrated at our inability to create just the right, perfect, socially just order. Frustrated that we can't find all the right answers to all the questions. Frustrated that every question we seem to answer in science or math blows open the door to 10 more questions that now we have to answer. And so instead of getting closer to all the answers, we're getting farther away. And then we have dashed expectations about those things that we thought would fulfill us perfectly, and they didn't. I experienced this when I was a young girl dating, and a gentleman I was dating just was not loving me perfectly. And he should have, because I was perfectly lovable. So why would he not love me perfectly? That's what he was supposed to do. And when he didn't see all of my needs and give me everything I wanted, my expectations of him were dashed, and they ended the relationship. I feel really bad for him now, because he was doing what human beings do, loving as well as he could, but imperfectly. We all do this. And then it leads to cynicism if we stay in there. And the cynicism looks like this. Fine, I want perfect, absolute, infinite, ultimate, unconditional truth, love, beauty, justice, home. But it doesn't exist. It's just not in the world. And so life is absurd. We desire what we can never have, and we become cynical. Human beings desire perfect, absolute, infinite, unconditional, and unconditioned truth, love, goodness, justice, beauty, and being home. And we can't get it from this world. So what do? We can end up in crisis, or we can move to a higher level. Happiness level 4 is the happiness that comes from the ultimate good. From seeking to place my desire for ultimacy in what is ultimacy itself. In God. Recognizing that unconditional, absolute, infinite, and perfect truth, love, justice, beauty, and home must exist as a reality because of my desire for it, because of my sense of crisis when I do not have that desire fulfilled. It must exist as a reality. And the word we use for that reality is God. Now we'll talk a lot more about this reality a little bit later and how to use that in our various works for respect for human life. But the key that I want to get out of it is this. There's a lot more to say about ultimate good. I'm not just going to end it here, but the key is this. Our culture is very quickly becoming very focused on level 1 and level 2. Go home tonight, or tomorrow because you'll be exhausted tonight, and take a look at the world around you, on TV or when you're walking around or in the mall or at your office, and see all the level 1 and 2 signals, messages that are being pushed on us. Start to see it. Right? And it's a good exercise you could do with your young people too, with your children, your grandchildren, your students, to have them actually look and be aware of the level 1 and level 2 messages being forced on us. And then the next day, take a look at the level 3 and level 4 signals and see where they're coming from mostly. And kind of compare that. The problem is our culture is very level 1 and 2. It's very unhealthy. It will lead to crisis. It leads to profound unhappiness in human beings, and it will lead to a crisis in the culture. Our goal needs to be to move people into levels 3 and 4. We can do that in the classroom or in religious education. In our studies with young people, you can do that in a counseling scenario if you're working with a pregnancy center with young women. You can do that in a hospice when you have time with people at the end of their lives who are actually now more open to discussing things like this than they were earlier. You can do this with people who have disabilities or people who work with those who have disabilities. A lot of times people who work with those with disabilities are still kind of, they could be stuck in level 1 and 2 as well. They're just like we are. They get tired, they get worn out, they get burned out. And sometimes we just need another boost into level 3 and 4 to remember the purpose of what it is I'm doing and why. We need to move people into level 3 and 4. Let me show you culturally what happens if we don't. There are 9 other categories besides happiness. Happiness is the 10th. 9 other categories that are seriously affected by the view of happiness. How we define happiness is going to determine how we define all these other words personally and culturally. And I would argue that most of these other terms right here are being defined culturally on levels 1 and 2 right now instead of 3 and 4. Let's take a look at the first 3. We'll get into the other ones a little bit later this afternoon. Let's take a look at those first 3 real quickly. 4 interpretations of success. Just as there are 4 different ways you can interpret happiness, there are 4 different ways you can understand success, depending on which level you're operating out of. Happiness level 1 views success as having the physical advantage over the other. I actually have more than you do. Happiness level 2 sees success as having an ego advantage over someone else. Level 3 sees it as having a transcendental advantage, not over you, but that I have the advantage of seeing the world through happiness level 3, through the good that I can do. And as long as I'm capable of doing that, then I am successful. And level 4 sees the ultimate advantage. I am successful when I am achieving the ultimate advantage, when I am achieving heaven, God, true faith, true relationship with Christ. When I have achieved that, I am really successful. And if I have to sacrifice level 1 and level 2 or even level 3 to get there, I will do it. Because that is the greatest success I can achieve. Think about the most successful people you've ever heard of in your life. Doesn't it usually, not the basketball stars, we know they're successful, but the most successful people, the ones who did the most, accomplished and achieved the most with their lives, doesn't it tend to be those people who have given themselves up and sacrificed for others? Think of Gandhi. Think of Jesus Christ. Think of Sophie Scholl, who at 21 years of age sacrificed her very life in defiance of the Nazis. As a university student, she sacrificed her life, had her head cut off because she defied the Nazis and their persecution of the Jews. These are the people we look at their lives and say, what a success, what an accomplishment. How I wish I was like that. Right? How I wish I could stand for that. Look at the ways we define quality of life. Level 1, I can enjoy material things. We define our worth and our quality through extrinsic things. Level 2, I can enjoy competitive advantage, another extrinsic worth. These we're getting our sense of worth, of meaning, of dignity, right? Our worthiness through something outside of ourselves. How you see me or how much stuff I have. But level 3 and level 4, quality of life on level 3, my life has worth and quality to the extent that I can give myself away to some good beyond myself. Even when I'm flat on my back in a hospital bed with 2 weeks of life left to live, my life can have more quality than it ever had in the 50 years preceding it, because I am more open now to love, to letting go of past ills, to forgiving, to reunion with my family, right? To exploring my faith deeper, to letting go and letting God in. There's this wonderful story that I was just told by a priest when I did a training out in Omaha, Nebraska. He tells a story about, it wasn't about him, it was about another priest, a brother priest, but he said that this priest had been called to a hospital to tend to a man who was dying. And the man hated God, hated faith, hated everything. He'd been Catholic when he was young, though, and now that he was actively dying, the hospice thought they should call in a Catholic priest to be with him. So this Catholic priest went in and thought, well, what am I going to do? This guy is really not open to faith. And he managed to talk to the guy for a little while, who was a bit hostile, I guess, at first. But after a while, the guy opened up and confessed to him that his anger stemmed from when he was younger, and he had caused an accident. And in the accident, there was a mother and 2 children, and the mother and the daughter died in the car accident. And he never forgave himself for that. And that caused his drop away from faith and caused him to see God as evil and hateful to have allowed that to happen. And the priest was shocked to hear this story, because he said, you know what, I have good news for you. I am the little boy from the car who survived that accident, and I forgive you. And it was all that man needed to let go of that pain and to see that God was a loving and forgiving God. Everybody cries at that story. Here I go. Right? It's a beautiful story and a beautiful way to see quality of life comes from my capacity to let God in. That's level 4. This one's wonderful. I am loved by God. Right? Our intrinsic worth. That what gives me value and worth is that I was loved by God. Ha-agapetos means the beloved one in Greek. Right? This is what Jesus called himself. Ha-agapetos. I am the beloved one. I am loved by the Father. And did you notice John calls himself that. St. John calls himself John the Beloved when he writes. John the Beloved. And sometimes we think, what a fathead, you know. I'm John the Beloved. That's not what he was saying. In those days, people gave themselves names as identifiers of what made them most worthy. I am John the carpenter's son, right? I am John the blacksmith. He says, no, what gives me worth and value and quality as a human being is that I was loved by Jesus. I am John the Beloved one. Right? Now you can see already, level 1, 2, this definition of worth in our culture. And freedom, how we define freedom. Happiness level 1 and 2 defines freedom as having no constraints, no obligations or commitments or duties, having all my options open all the time and not being constrained by any legal or ethical or moral obligations or obstacles. Okay? That's freedom. Boy, is that big in our culture. It's a whole pro-choice message of freedom is this. More choices equals more freedom. But level 3 and 4 would say, wait a minute, sometimes you need obligation and commitment and responsibilities and duties to open yourself up to what is truly worthy of you. The sacrifice of yourself for the good of another in love. Sometimes you have to close options that draw you away from love in order to truly find real freedom and fulfill yourself as a human person. Of course, that freedom from sees loss, constraint, debilitation, weakness, old age, terminal illness, disabilities, right? A child that is threatening my future as unfree. More options equals more freedom. But in level 3, 4, these things lead or open the door to empathy, understanding, compassion, forgiveness, patience, and love. If you could transform the way a person views happiness, you could transform the way they view success and quality of life and love and freedom. Take a look at the 4 levels of love. Level 1, physical attraction and gratification. Sex, level 1, lust. Level 2, being admired and possessing the other, the ability to control the other. Sex, level 2, I own you, I own your body, I own yourself. Sex on level 3, love on level 3, gift of self for the good of the other. Kimberly Hahn used to say, she didn't use the 4 levels of happiness, but I will. I kind of put words in her mouth. She used to say that love on level 3, when you have sex in level 3, love on level 3 becomes so whole and so real and so pure and so total that 9 months later you might have to give that love a name. Right? That love that moves beyond itself. And love on level 4, seeing and advancing the transcendental ultimate, the eternal good for the other. I don't just want your good in the world, I want your good for all of eternity. And so I'm willing to do what it takes to help you get to heaven as well as myself. This vision of happiness is what makes life worth living. If we could transform the definition of happiness, one little idea has consequences, but it can have good consequences as well as bad ones. If we could take back the definition of happiness, we could take back the definition of success and quality of life and love and freedom from those who have stolen them and emptied them of their full meaning. This is part of what it means to be pro-life. And this is part of what we need to do in our ministries.